This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I am Amy Goodman. We are live at the World Forum in The Hague, in the Netherlands. 100 years ago this week, over 1,000 women peace activists gathered from around the world to meet here in The Hague to call for an end to war. The extraordinary meeting, known as the International Congress of Women, took place as World War I raged across the globe. The gathering was organized by a Dutch suffragist named Dr. Aletta Jacobs. The event took place in the Netherlands because of its neutral position during World War I. Dr. Jacobs said the Congress was assembled to, quote, protest against war and to suggest steps which may lead to warfare becoming an impossibility. Two future Nobel Peace Prize winners took part in the U.S. delegation. Jane Addams, the co-founder of Hull House in Chicago, and the sociologist Emily Green Balch. The event marked the formation of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, known as WILP. Well, today, as wars rage in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and other countries, women from around the world have gathered again here in The Hague, close to 1,000 of them, to call for peace and to mark the 100th anniversary of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Today, we're joined by three guests: WILP's Secretary General, Madeleine Rees, newly elected WILP President, Kozue Akibayashi, and she is from Japan, and Hakima Abbas, Director of Programs for the Association for Women's Rights and Development in Africa. She prefers not to say exactly where for security reasons. We welcome you all to Democracy Now!
Thank you very much.
Madeleine, let's start with you. You've been with this organization for some time. 100 years ago, 1,200 women. Tell us the story of how they got here in The Hague.
It's quite incredible when you think that in those days there was no possibility of just SMSing each other or sending an email. It wouldn't have happened but for the suffrage movement, because you don't just start a mass movement. You actually have to have an organizational structure to make that happen. That had started with the suffragette movement. Every single one of those women who went to The Hague were suffragettes.
I'm talking, I mean, everywhere from Britain to the United States?
From Britain to the United States. Every single one of them were demanding the right to vote, because they saw, quite rightly, that the absence of women in making decisions in governments meant that there was greater likelihood of war, and they were right. So they organized, they were in touch with each other. As you said, it was Aletta Jacobs who was the one who was the main organizer here in The Hague. She had 1,000 women helping her to try to bring women from all over the world to protest war. The Americans came by boat. Again, that was Jane Addams, who was the organizer of that. They got as far as Dover and had to stop because...
In England.
In England. They got as far as Dover, had to stop because of the militarization of the Channel. There were activities going on. They couldn't cross. They had to wait 4 days there. 180 women wanted to come from the United Kingdom to protest. They were stopped by the United Kingdom authorities, who prevented them traveling because, goodness knows, it's not good to have women protesting war when you have got a propaganda machine rolling out the glories of the conflict. Eventually, several of them were able to make it to The Hague.
But basically, 120 British women were stopped.
Were stopped. Yes, and prevented from attending. So eventually, people made it to The Hague, 1,300 of them. They had to organize originally at the zoo, because it was the only space available for them.
They organized here?
Here in what was the zoo. It is not a zoo anymore.
The zoo in The Hague.
Yes. And then had the Congress. And at that Congress, they made the demands which were as relevant then as they are now.
And those demands, among them, what they were calling for in the midst of World War I?
So they wanted immediate cessation of hostilities. They wanted the neutral powers to engage with the belligerent powers to stop the conflict. They were actually bringing their demands at a time where over 100,000 men were at the very days being slaughtered at the Somme. So what they wanted was universal disarmament, a complete commitment to addressing root causes of conflict. They saw that the colonialism was one of those root conflicts, so the root causes of conflict, so they demanded that there be arbitration to understand the power dynamics and the decolonization process. And importantly, and I think for us particularly today, they wanted democratization of foreign policies. They said that war was too profound an act to be left to those who had power and who would use it for wrong. So they wanted we the people to be in charge of those foreign policies and making those decisions. And of course, underpinning all of that was the demand for universal suffrage for women.
Today, one of the things you've spoken about in this huge gathering at the World Forum in The Hague is the Foreign Minister of Sweden. Talk about what the recent controversy around Margot Wallström.
It's interesting because with Margot Wallström, we had what I thought was one of those moments in history when things should have shifted. For those who don't know, she was speaking about Saudi Arabia and the treatment of a blogger who was, as you may well recall, was sentenced to 1,000 lashes for criticizing the regime. She said that this treatment was medieval, and she went on to denounce the lack of human rights for women in Saudi Arabia. She was saying no more and no less than we all say, and most heads of states will say behind closed doors. But of course, one doesn't say that about Saudi Arabia because of the huge trading implications that there are. As a result of her having made that denunciation, or that clarity, I would suggest, she was refused entry into the Arab League, where she was going to make a speech on human rights. And as a result, instead of just giving way, she went home and she said, OK, we will now cancel our cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia on all things military. So they did that, and the response from the Saudis was to withdraw their ambassador, to impose visa restrictions on Swedes to go into Saudi Arabia, and the Arab League was going to follow suit. So there was uproar in Sweden amongst those who sought to trade with the Arab League. They were saying that the companies like H&M, Volvo, which shows just how easily the military is seen as a way, or the sales of military equipment and others, is seen as a way in for trade agreements, which then follow from that. So by closing that door, they were afraid they were going to have the door closed on their trading agreements. And they've tried to get the trade unions and others saying this is going to lead to loss of jobs, it's going to lead to the loss of trading possibilities for Sweden more generally. And Carl Bildt and others were wheeled out to say that it prejudiced Sweden's attempt to get a position on the Security Council, as if standing up for human rights and for furthering the real hard law of the Arms Trade Treaty was actually something which the Security Council should not be responsible for. So the backlash in Sweden from those interests was profound, but the support from the people was excellent. And I think that that was, for me, one of the greatest sadnesses of this was every other foreign minister stayed silent. Instead of every foreign minister standing up and saying, actually, what Margot Wallström has just done is to assert international law, international human rights principles, and the dominance and predominance that we must give to the control of arms to countries where they subordinate human rights to their own interests. And instead of doing that, there was this resounding silence, save for those who criticized her, and in a highly gendered way, to say that she was just being emotional, she was naive.